Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game developers and their players engage in conversation. It's been a pretty slow news week, so not a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, real slow.
Microsoft fucking bought Activision yesterday morning. I saw that first thing. I was up early and someone was already linking it at like 6:30 a.m. and I thought it was an April Fool's joke. Like, it still really hasn't sunk in. I was like laying on the couch last night thinking of the ramifications of all this. Like, it's really quite incredible.
Is it possible to know what the ramifications of this are? Like, that's sort of where I am with all of this.
Okay.
Yeah, like what changes, right?
Well,
Yeah, I feel like my Blizzard friends, of course, like I got a text message of 7 o'clock in the morning as soon as it broke, woke me up. Like, so this complicates things, and because of course, like many of my friends that are still there are pursuing opportunities elsewhere, and the common thread is that there is the belief that this will increase salaries, which I don't know. It's good that there's some hope, but what I wish for them is the clarity behind, like, feels like there should be some sort of statement that you give of like either like things are not changing, everything's fine, here's what actually does change, or like things are changing and here's what you can expect. Like, now we have the pay brackets of whatever they think is going to happen. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if they said anything to the company or not. There's a lot of speculation right now, and that feels bad.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that at the purchase, the price per share was basically sort of locked in. I don't know what that price is, but it was like essentially 30% higher than whatever the price was before the acquisition. So, or the purchase. So, it's basically locked into that whenever that gets settled. But it's going to take like another 18 months.
So what you're meaning to say is, like, if you had shares in Activision Blizzard before, like if you were an employee or if you weren't an employee or whatever, now suddenly those shares are worth 30% more. Should you sell?
Yes.
That
Okay.
has happened for sure. But you were talking about like what just changes in terms of
I'm
pay
talking about
bands,
unvested
compensation.
shares, which is typically, what a lot of the employees have is they have some sort of RSU or something, and so yeah, those are all basically cashed out now to whatever that value was.
Oh, it was forcibly cashed out.
They're going to be converted to cash, basically. Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow, an
Yeah.
early vest.
But I'm not clear on the terms. I think you might have to be at this. I don't know. It's unclear to me if they have to be at the studio when that happens or not.
Are these shares or are they options? Because I was in a company.
They're shares. Yeah.
Okay. I hope that, well, there's the case of people shares vesting. I hope, when acquisitions happen, people tend to get payouts, obviously. I would hope that some of that trickles down. What do you two feel like? Do you feel like Blizz might pay out extra? Like, there is a history of profit sharing there, right? And they have been really under the lens for just paying people below industry rate for a bit. Do you think they'll share the wealth a little bit, or is this going to be like the C-suite rakes it in and everyone else is just... Because, I mean, that's the conversation I've been seeing. Is like, I wonder if we're going to see any of this,
I wonder how much speculation helps versus like talking about what is a possibility, because we don't know, right? Like, I mean, we could speculate all we want, but like, so I actually had a question. If you guys know, like, isn't it possible then that they change the way that compensation works across the board whenever they buy a company like that? They can just say, we don't do profit sharing anymore. Everybody gets, fuck it, let's just be generous and say like, everybody gets 50% more salary or like whatever. And then there's like stock options of like purchasing, like you were saying. Like, couldn't they actually just burn the whole pay structure to the ground, or is that not legal?
I'm not sure.
Not legal. I wouldn't say it's not, illegal. It's unlikely they were going to drastically change pay at Blizzard post acquisition with Microsoft. I mean, they didn't really change the compensation philosophy very much after Blizzard got acquired by Activision. We were there when that happened.
Well, not in a way that was visible to somebody that wasn't in senior leadership or executive or director positions, but I do think that actually did change quite a bit for senior leaders.
Did it?
Though I could be misremembering. But I wonder, like, if we look to the past, Microsoft purchased Bethesda as well. Like, is there any way we could look at what, like, did Bethesda talk about it? Well, did anything major change? What was it like to get acquired by Microsoft by them?
Yeah, I've never been at a company that's been acquired by Microsoft, but I am at a company that was acquired last year. And I'll speak apocryphally here. I think one of the main considerations you want to make in a merger like this is obviously the price that you can negotiate for the entire business, but also if you plan on hanging around, which I'm not sure if Bobby plans to, but obviously the great majority of employees probably do plan to. You want to ensure that the culture can kind of still, culture is the wrong word here. I mean, that you're not going to be acquired by someone that's going to stick their hand in and start excessively micromanaging, right? You want to be acquired by someone that's hopefully going to let you continue to do what you do.
Right.
And from my
But
understanding, I'm sorry. Are we not
go for it.
talking
Sorry, I
about
didn't mean
that?
to. No, go for it. No. I was
Oh,
going
I
to talk
was
about culture, but I'm going to put a pin in that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying anecdotally, I think on the scale of complete laissez-faire to extreme micromanagement, Microsoft is probably in the middle and maybe towards the micromanagement side of the scale. I think they do tend to get involved. That's just sort of my experience, but it's a bit outdated. I worked for Microsoft several years ago. I was a contractor there for like 2.5 years. But I don't know, we'd have to have somebody who's at a Microsoft studio up to talk about how it feels to like be at Obsidian now or
Yeah, when it comes to culture, it's easy to think of game studio culture as something that's just driven entirely by the individuals that work there and how they treat one another. But actually, that's pretty far from the truth. The culture can sometimes be locked in by your policies, and what you as a company value, and as such, what you instill in your employees, right? Like if you have example, like a really shitty example, if you penalize people, if you dock their pay for being 1 minute late to meetings, you're gonna have a fucking company full of people that are early to meetings, right? Because ultimately, even though we do what we love when we work in games often, we're still showing up for a paycheck and we're still going to do the things that advance our careers. And whether that's like, well, we want everyone to be leaders here, so we're going to open a lot of leadership positions. And like so much of the company's structure and the company's pay and the company's incentives actually shake right into the culture. So if you think about whenever I was a little babby at Blizzard, the way that the pay was incentivized you to work was this: you did not get a salary until you were at senior level, and before senior level there's associate, there's mid level, and then there's senior. There's
oh
actually
right.
also an assistant level, and so you would get paid by the hour, right? And
You had to
so
log your
that in
time, right?
yeah, you had to log your time,
Mm-hmm.
and that incentivizes people who are making less money and living in a fairly high cost of living place to work overtime, right? And then so you can pair that with there's like don't ask, don't tell overtime, or you can say absolutely no overtime. I remember whenever I worked as a grocery checker, if I even went 1 minute over 8 hours, I would get barked at because they were like, "We don't pay overtime here, yada yada." Well, we do, but we don't want you working overtime, yada yada. So the industry that I grew up in was that the lowest people on the totem pole had to work the hardest and the longest, and and what that does though is it fosters an environment of like really hungry like junior talent, and then you feel like, oh, once I get senior, I'll finally be salaried. And for me, that salary that took my hourly pay, and they increased it by 20%, and they said, okay, this is your salary now, and then we'll multiply that times. If you don't know how a salary works, is it's assumed that you worked 2,080 hours in a year, and so they'll take your hourly rate. So it was like my hourly rate times 1.2, and then times 2080, and that was my salary. And that sounded like a lot of money, right? I was like, well, surely, like, I don't work more than 20% overtime, but my math was wrong because I'm not a strong designer, obviously. And I was like, oh, well, this is going to be like getting overtime pay all the time, except I only have to work 9 to 5. And that's incorrect because it turns out overtime pay is like pay and a half. And so even if you work like
Yeah.
7 to 10% overtime, then you're taking a pretty significant pay loss when you get to salaried. And again, like that does, I'll like shut up in a second, but like that also fosters a culture of like, well, once you're like tenured and once you've like made it, then suddenly you can start leaving the office at like a reasonable hour, or maybe you're not even putting in a full 8 hours of work. So then there's like this huge divide between like junior and senior talent And there's a lot of resentment both ways, right? Because one, there's the junior people that wish that they could live their lives and have their families and whatnot. And then there's the senior people who are like, I just want to go home at a reasonable hour, but your ass is staying here 8, 9, 10 hours, or 9, 10, 11 hours a day, making me look bad. So it's this like, there's this really weird like culture that happens when it comes to pay. And so looping it all the way back around, I just wonder like even minor changes to that stuff like that, like whether it's like overtime pay or like how does salary work can have like huge rippling effects on the culture of a company.
I think for a lot of people at Blizzard right now, or Activision also, is just like some of the questions they have are like, yeah, does this mean we get a pay raise? Or do my compensation change? And do I get an Xbox or Xbox Game Pass for free or whatever? And I think those are interesting questions, but I think broader, it's more interesting to think about what does the acquisition mean for Warcraft, Starcraft, Diablo? What does it mean for the future of Xbox versus PlayStation? What does it mean just for the industry at large? I think just before this acquisition, people were. I sent Luke a screenshot of a podcast we listened to, and it said the biggest acquisition in gaming history. And they were talking about Zynga because Zynga got acquired by Take-Two, and now that's like a small fry compared to this one, right? And so I think we're increasingly seeing consolidation of the game industry, the last generation of the game industry. I like to think, and then we're also seeing increasingly, the birth of perhaps the next generation, which is, or maybe of like game franchises and things like that, which is a lot of the new startups and stuff. So I think what this really means, and I tweeted, something like this out, is just that it's sort of a war for IP. I think this has been a year where we've, in the last couple of years, have just seen that IPs are just so valuable. Like we just saw this year with Arcane, right? It's really transformed, Riot's image and made. I was hearing someone from Riot telling me that all of the skins are selling really well for like all the Arcane characters. It's been insane. Like it's insurgence of new players and returning players to all of the Riot properties. With Netflix getting into the gaming industry, trying to leverage IPs on its platform. So I think comparing the deal for Blizzard versus say Zynga, I think a lot of it is just the value and future prospects of IPs like Warcraft, Diablo, Starcraft, Overwatch, Call of Duty, and what that can mean for strategically for Xbox and for Microsoft.
I wanted to underline that your source at Riot was not me. I don't know anything about League of Legends skin sales, and I don't, nor would I talk about that kind of thing. Just wanted because I'm a Riot employee. I did not share that information.
Yeah, if I would have, if it was Candace, I would have said Candace. But yeah,
and I also wanted to loop back around to like the culture. Sorry, one more time. You were saying, Luca, you said something really interesting that kind of struck me, where you said, when you acquire a company, you don't want to change its culture. But I feel like
if it's
given
working.
everything, everything that Blizzard is doing right now and has been going through, wouldn't you want to take a match to the culture and just say, we have something that's safe and inclusive, and maybe our values are going to be instilled into you. But then there's also like,
no, I tried not to watch any of like the Reactosphere content to this before coming on the podcast because I was hoping to have like one or two original thoughts. But it was such a good take that Asmund pointed out that effectively like the pre-purchase audit was effectively done for Microsoft by the state of California with all of this like cleansing legal fire over the last several months, and a lot of the shitheads are already out of there. So they really are able to just kind of swoop in and like effectively buy the IP. They're not able to buy all of the talent that's probably jumped overboard in the last several months. I mean, we don't know anybody like that, but they did get a lot of that culture kind of. It's been broken down to a degree that I think it's ready for. I don't know. Do you think that the people at Blizzard are generally like okay with, like a couple years ago, I think they would have fought tooth and nail to sort of lose the heart of Blizzard to an acquisition. But I feel like a lot of folks might be open to it now, kind of.
it does feel like is like, well, there's already some trouble. Stock price, it's got to be like a good purchase price, and also like it's a good time to strike to either like change things culturally in the company, or maybe even like the scary part is you remove redundancies, right? If you look at the strong suit that Activision has is like publishing, right? And so Blizzard leaned into that and used Activision in that regard, and like, well, Microsoft already has theirs too, and so you think about when mergers like when acquisitions like this happen, the first thing that they do is they start sunsetting those fucking redundancies. And so there's got to be a lot of fear in some people too, saying, well, is my job going to be obsolete now because Microsoft can already do this and they can already do it as
Microsoft
like
reorgs semi-annually. It happens so fucking frequently. I have a friend of mine that works in a leadership position there, and they had done like 3 in a year and a half. Like, they happen routinely. And so I think there's definitely going to be some weight shed here, and there are going to be layoffs. I think I feel really optimistic about this thing wholesale. Like, I know that it is a doom portrait for the future of consolidation in gaming, and to have that many IPs under one roof is a bit dangerous, but I think I trust Microsoft to handle Blizzard's properties better than current Blizzard. Like, that's just kind of where I land on it.
No, I know. Yep.
So you're saying this could be a net positive then to
I think it is.
The community at large, like, well, and you think that there's high trust that the quality of the games wouldn't be compromised?
I don't think the quality will be compromised. That Microsoft is not going to force them to hire new people that are of a certain way, but they might get rid of crusty leadership. It's like, I think what Microsoft might do versus this, I don't know. I just feel like a moment like this can be a bit of a lightning bolt through everybody of like, well, now we've really got to impress the overlord because we don't want them to kind of tighten their grip even more. I mean, do you remember like a year or two ago, before all of this fallout started happening, like all we wanted to talk about, or all gamers wanted to talk about, was how Activision was killing Blizzard? And now it's like, well, what, is Microsoft going to kill the Activision magic? Like, I feel like it's probably okay. And I think that Microsoft's acquisitions so far have, I don't know, I don't feel like, oh God, Obsidian's DLCs just like started tanking afterwards, and Bethesda hasn't shipped anything in a little bit, but like Arcane, shipped Deathloop last year. I don't feel like the heavy hand of Microsoft game studios has really like clamped on these people, but.
Yeah, I will say that I did notice with Obsidian when I played It Takes Two, I had to I think I downloaded the game on Steam and then had to load the Epic Origin, and then I had to log into Xbox Live, play the game. So, I don't know. I hope
that shit's awful.
I hope that doesn't happen.
If they force people into the Windows Metro store, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot. But I don't think they would do that. I had one quick question, just to talking about like the way that the games will actually be made and whether this will change that internally. Again, this is obviously speculative, but like at Blizzard, were there a lot of essentially full-time contractors? Like, did you two see, were there a lot of people on your teams, or was it just full-time employees, really? What was the situation like with that, staffing-wise, in your experience?
Honestly, no fucking idea. Like, how do you know? Unless the culture separates a contractor from a full-time employee. Like, for example, Amazon has a notion of like, you either have like a blue badge or a yellow badge or some shit, and the blue badge indicates that you're a full-time salaried employee, and the other ones indicate that you're not, or something like that. And that's the only way that you would know that someone's.
But I tend to find that most cultures that have contractors alongside full-time employees do have that kind of separation, just like anecdotally. But I just mean like Microsoft, when I first started working there, I was on there for, like a 12 or 18 month contract. And it was my first experience with this sort of gig economy, 18 months on an enforced 3 months furlough, so that you couldn't accidentally trip the labor law breaker and be considered a full-time employee. And then you would come back and do more tenure. And I didn't care at the time because I was young and hungry, and I could cash in overtime as a contractor there. But like, they staffed so many of their projects like this that, you have a real brain drain when you suddenly have like, say, half the team or a bunch of people, or a technical artist or somebody crucial to your pipeline has to leave for 3 months and it just doesn't line up with a milestone. I think that the practices of the software divisions of Microsoft, the staffing software divisions, because most of their software projects are just kind of like evergreen and they just go, they're enterprise. And bringing that sort of staffing paradigm over to games really would hurt how teams were when these breaks would happen. And I'm just wondering, like, because it does seem to be the most efficient way to
Yeah, your
on
question
Blizzard's
is
games.
Blizzard suddenly going to change its staffing model to have
Are they going to have a
bunch
lot more kind of
contract instead of full-time
full-time
employees?
contractor exactly that rotate on or off?
I don't think so. I think more and more though, Blizzard has been moving towards utilizing art houses and third party, solutions for things for sure, rather than having literally everybody in house. So, but that not necessarily just contracting all these things, but kind of in a bigger sense, like, hey, we
Okay.
need 400 skins. How about this art
Right,
house do
right,
it
right.
instead of growing our team by 30% or whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that actually makes smart business sense, and pretty much every studio does that these days. But I don't know about say, more contracting culture or whatever.
All right. Well, let's move on. I'm sure we're going to watch the fire on this continue to smolder for a couple more weeks. So we wanted to have an episode where we just kind of went through the backlog of some of the questions and topics that have been. And also, if at any point folks want to jump up, obviously, just raise your hand and we can skip the backlog and just go straight to you. But so looking at a couple of the ones that I pulled, we have a question on like game addiction and moderation. There was some good discussion on that. We had one on the WoW diary that John Stats wrote. Chris, I know you've mentioned a couple times. Maybe
Oh
even
yeah,
wanted
we
to.
should have John on. I've talked to him before.
Yeah.
Sometime this show we'll have John on and talk about that. Yeah.
It was a question from Chudri, more or less asking if something like that could happen again. There was a consenting crunch culture that he mentioned, which I think describes a lot of sort of early game development. And is that something we could see happening on a similar scale nowadays? And then there were also some questions about personalization, games kind of adjusting, say, rates of like currency earning experience, stuff like that, to kind of better keep players in line or like tune curves to what each player wants. Do we have any opinions on that kind of personalization? I don't know a lot about that.
Do we want to dive in on that question first? Do we want to address them in a sequentially?
Nah, let's just go in on. I mean, that one seems to have the most gravity so far. Like the first thing I thought of when I read this, I'm like trying to think of how it relates to experiences of ours I know of, and the PvP scaling was the first thought of mine. But like, I don't know that that's exactly analogous. What do you all think about rates adjusting to players, play rates and stuff like that, and kind of funneling people into paces of play that sort of suit them best?
It's really nebulous, right? Because there's a lot of like this kind of shit actually happens all the time in video games, but not so much like not the money driver or the monetization driver, but like if the game realizes you're being overwhelmed by enemies, sometimes it'll like put the brakes on the enemies, right? Or sometimes if the game notices that you die too many times, it'll like adjust the game. Best or worst, I guess you can decide which one is which, but like it'll either say like, hey, we've noticed you've died a bunch. Are you sure you don't want to reduce the difficulty? Or maybe they just like automatically say, you know what? We're going to like Left 4 Dead's a good example. Left 4 Dead, the director, is 100% just responding to what the player is doing. And that's fine, right? Like that's fun. That makes the game have like peaks and valleys, and it makes the game playable with, the person that doesn't play shooters and, your dog or whatever. Like whoever you're going to play Left 4 Dead with, you're going to have a good time because the game is adjusting to you. So there's like good cases of this, but then I think anytime you tie it back to money can be bad, right? But then there's even shades of gray there too, right? Where imagine you're paying monthly for an MMO, or I guess nobody does that anymore. Let's not imagine you do that. For some reason, you're
Not post
paying
Game Pass. Come on.
for your playtime. Yeah, you have the Game Pass or something, and it takes you longer to beat the game because you're good at the game, and the game doesn't throttle the enemy spawning for you. For example, there's no really good way to answer this besides taking it on a case for case basis and say like, is that predatory? And then hearing from enough people, enough diverse people, and say like yes or no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe not
Yeah, I think
everybody's going to like it.
generally those sort of systems that kind of like alter the game based on how good the player is, like in a PvE sense, I think it can be disruptive and then also just not that fun. I think in general, kind of AI. I forget I think there's a GDC talk about this where some designer was reflecting on adding a system in the game which basically kept trying to predict how good the player was and altering the game for them. It's like a basically auto difficulty mode or something. But in general, it just didn't work out because players just kind of want to. The better the AI is, the kind of worse the experience can be. Generally, you don't want to make an AI like a god, like insanely good, and you just kind of want to make it kind of predictable and kind of
Right.
really gamified. So
It's not even
I don't
just
know.
about predictability. That you mean you hit the nail on the head with like if you make things if everything always stays the same like level of intensity and difficulty, that actually doesn't make for a very satisfying experience because
Yeah,
people just as much as people want to be challenged, they want to feel a sense of mastery. And
yeah,
so if the moment they start getting better at the game, they don't get to feel that they're better at the game, well then fuck that. Like what's I
yeah.
mean, to me that's how Dark Souls plays out. But like, so I don't enjoy the Souls games, but I will play. I mean, I'm gonna play Elden Ring. We're all gonna fucking play it. But you don't. Again, like
Yeah.
part of the human brain loves to learn new things and loves to master things. And so if you automatically adjust it up, so again, like with the gray area, where like if there is a ceiling on the difficulty of the game and you adjust the difficulty down, that can be a satisfying experience. But if the ceiling's always going up and up and up, it would be an interesting experiment to see like what kind of niche crowd that could pull to because I'm sure there are some people. I mean, if you've ever taken like a BDSM test, there's someone for everybody. There's something for everybody out there, and maybe people like high on the masochism scale would like a game like that. But it is really interesting. So like, I guess those are our vectors, right? There's like difficulty and time investment, and then like what are your gains and rewards from it, and like whether it's an intrinsic thing. Like I just feel like I'm getting better at my class because there's no power progression. Or there's like hardly any games like that, but like or like I am paying more for this game in a significant way because I am good at it or bad at it, regardless of like which way that monetization swing goes. Where like I feel like you could put your stake in the ground and say whether something is good or bad.
If either of you could be responsible for implementing like an adaptive difficulty system or something like this that was so good that people wouldn't know it was happening and no one would ever discover it was in there until you like told them at a cocktail party, would you want
Man,
to do it?
I tried that shit. Honestly, they figured it out instantly. PTR, they figured it out, right?
They
Like,
did.
I guess I wasn't subtle, and also it was just like, what can I do in code? And also I don't code, but like, I did that for the artifact acquisitions, and people not only figured it out, but they like figured out how to game it like you do. And but it's like the purpose of it wasn't like to make it hard or whatever. The purpose of it was we didn't know like when you started in Legion, there's no way of knowing if you were like in item level like let's just use numbers that don't make sense because squish and like time and relevancy, but like you were in like item level 1 in white like white quality or gray quality gear, or that you were like a purple and legendary orange raider with like the cutting edge item level and all the maximized gems and whatnot. So like
You think
you
people
had
would
to
ferret it out?
but you want to make sure that it's both engaging to the person that has dumped a lot of time in the game, right? The person that has purples and oranges. But you also want to make sure it's fair to somebody who's just coming back to the game, hasn't played it in 4 or 5, 10 years, who cares? And so yeah,
Yeah.
the artifact acquisitions, because you had to get your artifact to play Legion. Like there was no playing the game without getting that weapon. That was like the crux of your progression, and the main storyline doesn't even launch until it's done and all that stuff. And so like I had to guarantee that everyone could do it. And so it was hard. But anyways, I'm not going to say that because I can't do it, nobody can do it. I'm just saying that there's a time and a place for it. And certainly like the first content that you do that like kicks off everything for the game is probably not
Yeah.
a great place to do it. But certainly I think that a good place for it is like a scaling feature or like a roguelike. Like if you could do it with Torghast, for example, that could be
Yeah.
fun because depending on if you just you know, if the game detects that you're like super overgearing your Torghast run or whatever, and for those who don't know, Torghast was like WoW's take on a roguelike, where it was a anywhere between like a 6 and 18 floor dungeon that would get progressively harder and harder, but it would only scale by like a numeric percent, it wasn't linear, but it was like a 5% more and then 10% more or whatever, and it would get harder and harder and harder. But your power could vary wildly based on the roguelike elements that you chose. So like every time you clear a floor, you'd get some sort of power-ups, and then those had synergies and whatnot. And so like that would be a place where I think it could be appropriate and it could be really fun. But again, like you don't want to undermine the player's sense of progression and the player's sense of mastery because it's in an RPG. Then again, if you were to have Torghast in Left 4 Dead, shit would probably be bananas and really fun because you're not worried about rewards or long-term progression or. So anyways, I solved the problem. There it is. So put it in Left 4 Dead. Oops, it's already in Left 4 Dead.
Okay. I think this is a really nuanced question, because just reading over what Chudri said, the idea of like rate limiting how many coins I can earn to bring me back to a healthy balance, I hate when I run into fucking walls like that. And I feel like most people do. Like, can you think of anybody that goes, oh man, thank goodness there are these alchemy cooldowns here just to like keep me from going off the deep end, converting Arcanite all day, every day, like for my own good. I mean, they're there to stretch things out, and I suppose they can have the effect of forcing people to slow down, but no one likes that shit. But in terms of difficulty, like it brings me no particular joy to have to go into a menu and kind of guess at what difficulty I want. Like I only really ever bother doing it at the beginning of the game, and only if it's like there's an achievement I can only get if I set it to this and then never change it. But I feel like
hate it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I always do it. I know. But like I read Atomic Habits recently, and this makes me think of when he's talking about, you know, the flow state, when you kind of have like the rote left side of your brain and the creative parts of your brain kind of working together right in harmony, and it tends to get done. I'm sorting all sorts of like citing pseudoscience here, but with tasks that are just kind of like 5% above your skill level. And that's when you are able to get in the zone. And so it's, you don't want to push yourself too hard, right? But like that, I think that like personalization as it pertains to trying to make games hit the sweet spot is great. Like I can see why you'd want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the other classic example of this is like blue shelling, right? With Mario Kart's blue shell. Which is so funny,
as
just
you know,
today I had a
love the
one-on-one
blue shell.
I had a one-on-one with another player, and we are just talking about, you know, using blue shell is just a word, you know, it's just so funny.
For those who don't know, the blue shell mechanic in Mario Kart is that the person who's it's a racing game, and if you're last in place, then you're suddenly gifted a blue shell, and then you can use it or not use it. And then whenever you do, it knocks the person in first place like over, like it slows them down a little bit.
It's also for Koopas that have chosen not to leave their time in the Matrix, which is a simulated reality. Sorry,
keep going, Chris. I just wanted to provide the explanation to Blue Shell.
Oh, no. I mean, I just was mentioning that. And then the other interesting thing here, too, it just dawned on me, was that lawsuit with EA, because they do dynamic difficulty scaling. And then they also sell loot boxes that give you power. And so there was a lawsuit about that, because it's just like they are just essentially the player can never really outskill the game because it keeps raising the bar, and that just keeps incentivizing monetization for them. And so, yeah, that caused the lawsuit. So I didn't even follow that, if what happened to that lawsuit. But yeah, that was a little caveat.
Yeah,
did you ever see Wayne's World?
Yeah.
This is the kids keep coughing up quarters scenario with Xantar the gelatinous cube. The beauty part is you can't get to the next level. So, you know, the kids just keep coughing up quarters. It's just... Yeah.
Wanted to remind everybody that if you have a question here in the audience, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll bring you up, and you could ask live here. But let's maybe move on to one of the other topics you had, Luca.
Yeah. Minnow also asked about what the current status of mod communities for games are, on the topic of Bethesda and Starfield. Yeah, I mean, are they a great way to extend the life of games, or are there ways developers are extending the life of their games with dev updates? I mean, I'll just answer this. I feel like most of the games that grab my attention these days still are games that end up featuring mods. Games that have a lot of depth and richness to them, like in terms of replayability, I think get more modding attention. Also, smaller games, I feel like, generally get more modding attention. I think it's less common for AAAs to really stick it with mod support these days. I feel like that it's a bit orthogonal to what they want to do in terms of controlling how things are paced. But like Slay the Spire, active mod community, Monster Train. I'm just going to list deck building roguelikes here, but Inscription, another one that just came out recently, has a mod for it that I think a lot of people are playing as like the main way to play the game.
What? Sorry, what? I'm
What?
playing that game. What is the mod?
It's difficult, and I'm only like 2 hours into that game, but it feels like it's difficult to talk about what the mod is and what it lets you do without exposing what I imagine is the overall structure of that game. Because,
Understood. Okay.
anyways, I know at Clay we are very in favor of mod support in our games. Oxygen Not Included allows it, Don't Starve allows it, and these are live service games that we just continue to push dev updates for. So, the flame for that stuff has not died. I mean, do you remember there was like an era in gaming, I want to say it's like this early 2010s, when it felt like UGC and like, crowdsourced content, and all these were the buzzwords of the time. And so I certainly think that there's like a lot of value there still, but
The modding community is really strong in a game like Skyrim, which is probably what's kept it so evergreen, right? It's a very large sandboxy game, and then making it your own is probably pretty appealing there. It's got a great like RPG base structure. People love to mod that game. Minecraft is another one that comes to mind that people mod a lot. And the last thing I wanted to say to like give me a little bit of OG street cred, the first game I ever modded was Doom, like the original like on my Packard Bell Doom game.
you making
And
mods?
no, I found a mod that made all the enemies look like Sailor Moon characters, and I was very happy about it.
Nice. Yeah. So I don't think they're going away anytime soon. I think that modded gameplay is one of the, I think the cloud gaming and streaming platforms and subscription-based stuff, all this kind of like nebulous licensing ownership shit is an existential threat to modding. So I don't like that we're trending that way in terms of what it means for mods. Like, I mean, I was able to play Cyberpunk just a few weeks after release, largely because the modding community had jumped in and fixed a ton of shit that CPR had not fixed yet. And if I were playing that shit on Stadia, I would have had no way to do it. So as more and more stuff moves onto Game Pass, you just have to rely on developers to be on top of fixes, which...
My hot take on mods is, I'm less bullish than you guys.
Bullish? Yeah, okay.
I like mods. Of course, Warcraft 3 was and most Blizzard games were really influential to me just because I was able to, use the creator tools to make my own sort of mini games and things like that, and obviously Dota, etc. But I think it just depends on the game. It depends on what the game is trying to do, what the player experience is. I think, when I think about mods, I think a lot about, WoW's mods. And I think WoW mods have added a lot to the game, but also have hurt the game a lot. And so, I think you really have to like sit down and evaluate the pros and cons of, what you're allowing the player to do with mods and what that really means for the game, right? Like I think the big thing with WoW mods was it made encounters way easier, and then the encounter designers had to make the bosses a lot harder. But if you never use mods, now they're just sort of it was just essentially they're made for players with mods, which is kind of an unofficial thing, but kind of assumed thing, and it just gets kind of weird. And it's like an arms race between design and the player, right? So yeah, I think if the game is like a single player game or whatever, just like go ham, I guess, on mods. Like it doesn't really matter. But if it's like an online competitive sort of game, I think there's a lot other challenges there.
Yeah.
We got
we got someone up on stage. Sorry. Go for it.
yeah. Get creative. Cool icon. I love Doge. That was my Steam icon for like years. So
It's true.
yeah.
I thought it was your dog.
Yeah, that was hilarious. Luca thought it was my dog. I'm like, nope.
So what's up?
So, in specific, recently I'm pursuing game design, but I've been participating in like game jams and trying to put teams together in those kind of situations. And a lot of the time, I find myself not satisfied with like the things I make, or like not get into like I always want to improve the thing I'm working on, right? And I never really feel satisfied. How do you end up in a situation not to allow that to go through to the other people you're working with? Because I could find situations where through like me having to like organize people and give feedback on what they're doing and so forth, it might come through that, for example, if I'm not like satisfied with a certain system in a certain way, and I'm always wanting to make it better. Even if like the game's done and over with, people can feel like it's a represent like my opinion on their work rather than just my desire to want to make the game better.
Yeah, I hear you.
Oof.
That's the hard part of being a collaborator, and I'll take a stab at this. So for one, the first thing I would say is resist the urge to noodle on something until it becomes perfect, because like gas expands to fill the space it's given, so will your need to finish something. Um, but also, if you want to take a learning away from that, it's look peer inside yourself. Why did the product not end up the way that you wanted it to end up? Like, was it, and like the spoiler here is that, well, there's a couple spoilers here, but like, um where in the process did it go wrong? How effectively did you communicate the design, the like intended design to the team? How well did you collaborate with the people? And what were the check-ins like, and what was the alignment like, did everyone have a really good notion of what they were making? Could it have been better? Could you have taken like gameplay snippets from other games and be like, here's exactly the thing? And like, because describing something that doesn't exist is really hard, right? And that's why games fucking sometimes are non-starters, and they don't end up actually shipping, because people just can't get aligned. Like, everyone thinks like, we're making this game, another person thinks they're gonna make that game, and then you get the rogue designer that's like, no, but I want to put in this like fucking system or something like that. And
Sure.
so aligning a team is like the
That's
hardest thing
me.
you'll ever do, and I've spent 15 years doing it, and I'm still not a game director because I still struggle with this, right? So, but the only thing I can do is start peering into like, how did this go wrong? How could it be better? If it's off, how was it off? And then kind of like apply that to the future, I guess. And then also, like, then the other side of that coin is not just, I'm not blaming you, by the way. This is everybody. This is alignment for the whole team. It's alignment for like however many designers you had, or if the design ended up changing because of the animations, or the art didn't do whatever. I'm not saying that's like the designer's fault. I'm just saying that like there was either the vision for the game wasn't strong enough, or the vision for the game was not strongly enough communicated such that everybody could align around it. But then also, the hardest thing for me to learn as a collaborator and as a leader is to be, not to accept that things are imperfect, but like in your mind, everything goes XYZ. And then so whenever it ends up being like ZYX, you're like, no, no, it needed to have been XYZ. But then sometimes maybe you were wrong about it needing to be XYZ. And maybe like our animators like, actually, we put like Y first because this or something. And you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Because again, like it's almost like how it's hard to picture what something looks like on you until you try it on, or it's hard to picture what decorating a room is going to look like until you have everything there, and then you might hate it or you might love it. But anyways, like TLDR, like, one, have strong vision and understand what it means to have strong vision. Two, and if you didn't, then like try to get some learnings there. Two, communicate the vision and get people aligned. And it's almost like it's not tricking people into believing it's their idea. It's genuinely leaning into their expertise and saying like, I had this idea for this thing. Can you make this better? Like, that's my mantra whenever I'm when I'm in a leadership role, is like, there's this idea. How can you make this better? And how can you make this better? And then
Essentially
managing
turning
the
your teammates into
expectations.
advocates.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've worked with a sound designer who's like pursuing that, right? And he always mentioned that reference is king. Do you always find that to be true?
100%. If that, to be honest, like, if you have an idea, it's probably not as genuine or as original as you think it is. Like, someone's already done it, or at least parts of it. You could say
Sure.
like, this is how it felt or something like that, which is harder without them playing it. But like, here's how it looks and here's how it's presented, and like, see how the monsters like sway side to side whenever they're in combat. Like, that's the kind of thing I want. And there's literally no maximum amount of calling it. You can call it reference, you can call it side in or whatever, to try to get people aligned. There's
All right, I didn't quite hear what you said. Get creative. Like, is what is
Uh,
king?
oh, reference.
Oh,
reference.
reference.
Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think, Luca? You're a sound designer.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think great artists steal, right? I think that there's no, first off, I think referencing past work, especially when people share things so openly and there's such a wealth of info out there now, like there's no reason just not to build on top of what's already been done. I'm doing that right now on the project that I'm on. I'm trying to think about some character dialogue I wanted to do something with like a pseudo speech kind of system, which I didn't really have a lot of experience doing. And I was able to go out and download the entire FMOD audio project of Celeste, which contains documentation from Kevin at Power Up Audio. And he's got a whole tweet storm where he explained what he did. And I think that, there's nothing to be ashamed of with just like starting where somebody else left off if you're trying to push the medium forward. Not everything has to come from just like a bolt of lightning that only you experienced. But your question was more about trying to give people a direction to go in. And I think that, if you're trying to find common ground with somebody from another discipline, you have to use a common reference. And I think that there's a way to get that across without making it feel like if you don't hit this goal, it's bad, because for a short game jam, it would be impossible for a team that doesn't really even know each other to pull off some things that you're probably referencing. But it's good to have something to aim for, and in terms of how to give people feedback and notes and want to raise the bar without coming across as like demeaning or demanding, I think that's just going to have to come down to your relationship with the person. Do they feel, do they trust you? Do they feel like you have, are you on their side, right? Like, are you trying to push the game forward, or are you trying to tell them that you know better than them? Maybe I'm misinterpreting your question, but most of what I heard and what you were talking about was like interpersonal challenges versus just creative challenges and game jams, which, obviously feature both, but I don't know if that helps. I mean, feedback is a really, radical candor and all that. It's a whole ass topic. And we've talked about it a little bit before, but.
Oh, well, thank you for the responses.
Of course.
Thank you for asking. Who do we have raising their hand? Goose Comics.
There you go.
My apologies. I did not see that there was an accept button up top.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I brought this up. The last topic was time gating in games. And I know, Luca, you mentioned earlier in the episode about Arcanite and other like profession transmutes and how like, why can't I just do this whenever I want? That would benefit you personally. On the other end, it would also not benefit you personally because that would decrease the rarity of that particular item. So I can see both angles of like, let me just make it versus like, what, I kind of want the money. I'm glad they have this cooldown on it. But the video that I mentioned and posted last week was Maximilian, dude. He was doing his top 5 games of 2021, and he brought up a game, Monster Hunter Rise, in one of his spots. Remember, he was remembering a spot where you can farm certain monsters for a specific item. I don't play the game, so I don't know the item. I apologize. But he said it was quite fun to do and get the item to make the thing that you wanted to do, and that was cool. Someone in his chat mentioned that it was nerfed and you couldn't do that anymore. And then that's when Max went on his rant saying, this is the thing that I don't like about companies lately, gaming companies lately. This is a thing that they want to create content to arbitrarily waste your time and wait. You get the item, you have to wait for it to work. And I, as a WoW player, just thought it was just a WoW thing. And it was just kind of disheartened to hear that it sounds like it's industry wide. And Candice, I know you mentioned last week that you could chime in on this, and I was wondering if you had any more insight on that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a hard question, right? Because to some extent, it feels bad for the game that you have gained mastery over, and like you did all these learnings and you found out this new strategy or whatever, and then they undermine it by saying like, oh, well, fuck that, we're going to nerf it or whatever. Certainly it happens it probably happens a lot, but I wouldn't say it's ubiquitous. Like not every game does this. Some games will just be like, it's fine, especially if it's a single player game. Some single player games, if it ruins the experience of the game, they might patch it or something, should they have the capability to do so. But it's a really hard topic because at some point as the developer, you have to decide what the best call for all of your players are. And sometimes that does mean that you have to make a call that's going to hurt, worst case scenario, you have like, it's a split, 40 or 51 and 49% or something. And like, you got to take the L on the 49% so that the 51% can have fun. Or maybe you don't, maybe you do it the other way around and you say, well, it's such a close call. But like, I guess to some extent, like I would hope that the integrity behind the change, if should a game change meaningfully after it's launched, that it would be like, the integrity would be like, is it for the better play experience? And then also, like, is it also possible that you could let people still do the thing that they like to do and not do it, or do it less, or opt out of this change or something like that? There's actually a really good talk by a guy at Riot called Cursed Problems, where he goes over like 4 different ways to approach these kind of things, where like the cursed problem, meaning that it's a problem that doesn't have a great solution, right? Like you have a problem that's at odds with the fundamental design of the game. So for example, in a multiplayer like PvP game or something like that, if there's a game that if there's a cheat, or if there's like a strategy or something that completely undermines the PvP experience, then of course that undermines the entire game. But and so that's like an easy call. But what if you just have some problems that like are inherently going to cause conflict? I can't think of any good examples off the top of my head, but I'll link it in live chatting. The person that did the talk is called Alex Jaffe, and he has some really good ways to talk about like how games usually do it. And there's like 4 different ways. There's like carrots, which is like you dangle a carrot in front of the player and you say, please don't do this thing, or please do the thing that we want you to do. Then there's like gates and barriers. Gates meaning like gates we just block you from doing it, or no, barriers mean like we would like block you from doing it. You can't do it anymore. And a gate means like, okay, we let you do it, but not like as much as you would want to be able to do it to ruin the game. There's s'mores, which I think a lot of games are leaning into. S'mores is like, oh, you want to do this degenerate behavior? All right, fine. That's what the whole game's going to be about now. Fuck it. The whole game is this degenerate behavior, and that's what we're going to do. There's one more I can't remember. No, I think it is gates, barriers, carrots, and s'mores. But it's a really good talk. I highly recommend it. And as far as like changing the game goes, it's just such a gray area, man. There's no like really good answer.
Yeah, I got the topic pulled up. Thank you for that. If I may, one more thing. Maximilian mentioned like this was a thing like companies can make money instead of microtransactions. Whereas like, you know what, I can just do the thing in game and then wait for 24 minutes, 24 hours, wait for the day before I can actually do the thing, versus me just like paying them for me to play the game even better, just make it faster. Is there any truth to that, where the longer you play the game, you actually make the company more money versus just paying them to bypass that product?
Oh man, I don't have an answer to that. I don't do monetization. I've never had to care about that.
I think you can, if you're keeping their eyeballs kind of, and this is the attention economy, right? So if they're hanging around, there are just more opportunities for them to spend money, even if they didn't really plan to. You'd have to support it with microtransactions unless they're playing the game as, I don't know, mining Bitcoin for you on the other end or something. But, keeping them in there, certainly, and it looks good. Yes, as Winter points out, you're talking about engagement versus just buying a product. Does engagement directly make money? It's up to the design of the game, I guess. But certainly, I think all but maybe the smallest and most ethical developers would steer towards wanting the players to spend more time in their games than less. So, and yeah, grinding levels out versus just buying boxes and boosts or advancing the clock or buying more gems to flip. I mean, a lot of these are these sorts of mobile game design mechanisms that have been creeping in over the last 10 or 12 years. And so that stuff is fully suffused AAA, obviously. Like it or not, that stuff's here to stay until we find the next better way to make money. And that's where man, I feel like this leads directly into like a metaverse discussion. Not that I particularly want to have it, but you know what I mean?
Play to earn.
Yeah, the idea of just like hanging out in the game. I hope that helped.
Time.
Okay, see you, Candace. All right, do we have any more hands that want to come up, or should we call this one keeper prompt?
I think we can call this one.
Let's call her.
7.
Okay, we'll try to be back next week. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. As usual, leave your topics and questions and suggestions and everything here on Discord. And as evidenced by this show, we'll try to get to them. So until next time.
Later, gamers.
Bye-bye.